Hello Treasure, I have a new series of stories for you. These are about The Worst Witch by Jill Murphy. Mildred Hubble is the worst witch at Miss Cackle's Academy for Witches. She's always getting her spells wrong, but she manages to get by until she turns Ethel, the teacher's pet, into her deadly enemy. Ooh, now that's just the introduction. So I'm going to read you the first chapter, and then if you like the story, you can perhaps buy the book yourself or borrow it from the library and see what happens to the end of the story. So this is chapter 1. Miss Cackle's Academy for Witches stood at the top of a high mountain surrounded by a pine forest. It looked more like a prison than a school, with its gloomy grey walls and turrets. Sometimes you could see the pupils on their broomsticks flitting like bats above the playground wall, but usually the place was half hidden in mist, so that if you had glanced up at the mountain, you would probably not have noticed the building was there at all. And if you can hear a gnawing noise in the background, that's my familiar PJ, the fox red Labrador, gnawing on his bone. He might come and say hello to you later, Treasure. So, back to the story. Everything about the school was dark and shadowy. There were long, narrow corridors and winding staircases. And of course, there were the girls themselves, dressed in long black gym slips, black stockings, black hobnail boots, grey shirts and grey and black ties. Even their summer dresses were black and grey checked. The only touches of colour they had were the sashes round their gym slips, a different colour for each house. And the school badge, of course, which was a black cat sitting on a yellow moon. For special occasions such as prize giving or Halloween, there was another uniform the girls wore, consisting of a long robe worn with a tall, pointy hat. Do you think it was like my pointy hat? I think it might have been. And of course, these were all black too. It really didn't make much of a change. There were so many rules that you couldn't do anything without being told off. And there seemed to be tests and exams every week. Mildred Hubble was in her first year at the school. She was one of those people who always seemed to be in trouble. She didn't exactly mean to break the rules or to annoy the teachers, but things just seemed to happen whenever she was around. You could rely on Mildred to have her hat on back to front, or her bootlaces trailing along the floor. She couldn't walk from one end of a corridor to the other without someone yelling at her, and nearly every night she was writing lines or being kept in. Not that there was anywhere to go if you were allowed out. Anyway, she had lots of friends, even if they did keep a distance in the potion laboratory, and her best friend Maud, she stayed loyal by her through everything, however hair-raising it was. They made a funny pair, for Mildred was tall and thin, with long plaits, which she often chewed absent-mindedly, another thing she was told off about, while Maud was short and tubby, had round glasses and wore her hair in bunches. On her first day at the academy, each pupil was given a broomstick and taught how to ride it. And it takes quite a long time to learn how to ride a broomstick. But they managed eventually. And halfway through the first term, they were looking pleased with themselves because at that halfway point, they were each given a black kitten. And they had to train them to ride on their broomsticks with them. The kittens weren't for any practical purpose except to keep tradition going. Some schools present owls instead, but it's just a matter of taste. Do you think you'd prefer a black cat, an owl, or a fox red Labrador like I have, PJ? Now, Miss Cackle was very traditional for a headmistress who did not believe in any newfangled nonsense, and she trained her young witches to keep up all the customs that they had been taught in her younger days. At the end of the first year, each pupil received a copy of the Popular Book of Spells. It was 3 inches thick, a volume bound in black leather. This was not really to be used, as they already had paperback editions for the classroom, but, like the cats, it was another piece of tradition, and Miss Cackle thrived on tradition. Apart from the annual prize giving, that's every year, there were no more presentations until the 5th and final year, when the pupils were awarded the Witches' Higher Certificate. It did not seem likely that Mildred would ever get that far. After only 2 days at the school, she crashed her broomstick into the yard wall, broke her broomstick in half and bent her hat. She mended the stick with glue and sticky tape. Fortunately, it still flew, but there was an ugly bundle where the ends joined together, and sometimes it was rather difficult to control. This story really begins halfway through Mildred's first term, on the night before the presentation of the kittens. It was almost midnight, and the school was in darkness, except for one narrow window lit softly by the glow of a candle. This was Mildred's room, where she was sitting in bed wearing a pair of black and grey striped pyjamas and dropping off to sleep every few minutes. Maud was curled up on the end of the bed, enveloped in a grey flannel nightdress and a black woolen shawl. Each pupil had the same type of room, very simple, with a wardrobe, iron bedstead, a table and a chair, and a slit window like the ones used by archers in castles of long ago. There was a picture rail along the bare wall from which hung a sampler embroidered with a quotation from the Book of Spells, and also, during the day, several bats were hanging out there. Mildred had 3 bats in her room, little furry ones. They were very friendly. She was fond of animals and liked looking forward to the next day when she would have a kitten of her very own. Everyone was so excited about the kitten presentation, and they had all spent the evening ironing their best robes and pushing the dents out of their best hats. See, mine's a bit bent too, but I think it's part of character, isn't it? Oh, they got ready. Maud was so excited she couldn't sleep, so she sneaked into Mildred's room to talk it over with her best friend. "What are you going to call yours?" whispered Maud. "Oh, I don't know. Midnight," said Maud. "I think it sounds dramatic." "Oh, I'm worried about the whole thing," Mildred confessed, chewing the end of her plait. "I'm sure to do something dreadful like treading on its tail, or else it will take one look at me and leap out of the window. Something's bound to go wrong." "Don't be silly," said Maud. "You know you have a lovely way with animals, and as far as treading on its tail, it won't even be on the floor. Miss Cackle hands it to you, and that's all there is to it. So there's nothing to worry about, is there?" Before Mildred had time to reply, the door crashed open to reveal their form mistress, Miss Hardbroom, standing in the doorway looking very stern. She was wrapped in a black dressing gown with a lantern in her hand. She was a tall, terrifying lady with a sharp, bony face, black hair scraggled back into such a tight knot that her forehead looked quite stretched. Rather late to be up, isn't it, girls? She inquired nastily. The girls, who had leapt into each other's arms when the door burst open, drew apart and fixed their eyes on the floor. Of course, if we don't want to be included in the presentation tomorrow, we are certainly going to have to go about it the right way, Miss Hardbroom continued icily. Yes, Miss Hardbroom, chorused the girls miserably. Miss Hardbroom glared meaningfully at Mildred's candle and swept out into the corridor with Maud in front of her. Mildred hastily blew out the candle and dived under the bedclothes, but she still could not get to sleep. Outside the window she could hear the owls hoot-doo-doo-hoo-hoo. The owls were hooting toot-doo-hoo, toot-doo-hoo, and somewhere in the school a door had been left open and was creaking backwards and forwards. Hello, PJ. In the wind. To tell you the truth, Mildred was so afraid of the dark, but she dare not tell anyone. I mean, who ever heard of a witch who was scared of the dark? That's chapter 1 of The Worst Witch by Jill Murphy. So if you want to know what happened to the girls at the presentation of the kittens, borrow a copy from the library. It's a really good book. Bye, Treasure.